overdose. Sadly, many of those were of college age and just a little older. As a physician, I'm particularly troubled that 80% of people who use heroin first misused prescription opioids, which were often prescribed for an injury. Every day, student athletes, like many of you, suffer injuries and are prescribed opioids to manage the pain. As the father of 3 relatively recent college graduates, including a collegiate pole vaulter, she didn't get that from her father, who required knee surgery, and currently a 17-year-old high school soccer player, I understand that balancing the need for short-term pain control with the risk of addiction can be a real challenge. Through programs like the Knockout Opioid Abuse Town Hall series, Horizon and the Partnership for a Drug-Free New Jersey are working to educate people of all ages of the dangers of opioid misuse, and we welcome the opportunity to share this message with the Rutgers community. I am confident some of the stories, advice, and best practices you will hear about today from our distinguished guests will have an impact on you. Everyone knows someone who has been affected by the opioid crisis, and it's so vitally important for those whose lives have been touched to educate us. We all need to be part of the solution, and I hope that message becomes even clearer throughout today's discussion. In closing, I want to thank Rutgers for hosting us and for collaborating with us to present this town hall. In particular, thank you to the Rutgers athletic staff, to Pat Hobbs, and the people here at the RAC for facilitating this important event. I also want to thank our distinguished guests for their participation, and I want to thank you in advance for your participation as our community addresses this public health crisis. Thank you.
Don, we thank you for your leadership and the commitment of Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey and the Horizon Foundation in addressing this issue. Our first featured speaker has become one of the nation's leaders in the fight against the opioid epidemic. Since taking office in early 2018, New Jersey Attorney General Gurbir S. Grewal has launched a host of initiatives to proactively address the crisis in this state. He immediately announced the creation of the Office of New Jersey Coordinator of Addiction Response and Enforcement Strategies, or NJ Cares, which has created opioid response teams to assist addicted individuals and provide them support and access to treatment programs. The initiative has also provided real-time data to better track the impact of the epidemic in all 21 counties. The Office of the Attorney General has played a lead role in educating high school athletes through the Stop Opioid Abuse program, a collaboration between the Office of the Attorney General, Garden State Pharmacy owners, the New Jersey State Interscholastic Athletic Association, the New Jersey Prevention Network, and the Partnership for a Drug-Free New Jersey, as well as other organizations. We thank him for taking time today from his busy schedule to join us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the New Jersey Attorney General, the Honorable Gurbir S. Grewal.
Good morning, everyone. You know, it's always a good day when the person introducing you gets your name right, and with a name like Gurbir Grewal, that's not always the case, so thank you, Chris, for getting that pronunciation right. Thank you to Pat Hobbs and Horizon for hosting us today. Thank you for letting us into your house. I was thinking about the last time I was here at the RAC as I was sitting there, and it came to me. It was in 2010. I'm a Georgetown graduate. And then the number 7 ranked Georgetown Hoyas came here to play Rutgers in the Big East, and I was really excited about coming down here to see them get a victory. Got courtside seats, sitting, I don't know if it was on this side or that side, but then we were upset by Rutgers by about 2 points in the last 4 seconds. So hopefully I'll have a better experience here this morning than I did 9 years ago. As Attorney General, I get invited to speak to a lot of different groups about a lot of different topics. And as General Hoffman could attest to, sometimes we feel like wind-up dolls, that you're given a book like this and you're told where you need to go with a briefing memo and remarks, and then you come to that podium and you read your remarks. And I'm sure these remarks are really good, but I'm not going to use them, and I feel bad for the person who wrote them. That's because this is a personal topic. This is a topic that I've experienced firsthand, not just as Attorney General, but before as the Bergen County prosecutor. I've sat with families who have lost loved ones. I have worked with parents to heal after the loss of a son and a daughter. I've talked to high school students with those in recovery to prevent others from getting down this path to addiction. And so I think what I'd like to do is share one experience with you that I think would resonate with each of you. And Ellen Elias is here from Bergen County. We've done a lot of these events together. And I want to share Brendan Cole's story because I think that's one that really resonates. Brendan Cole was a high school star athlete, like many of you in this audience. He graduated from Bergen Catholic, and he was a lacrosse player. National Honor Society, incredible career in high school sports, and got into his first choice, which was the University of Richmond. And he went down there and he played lacrosse. Before going down to college, he had been prescribed opioids for sports injuries, but there were no obvious signs of his addiction to his family and to his friends. And then his senior year, he came home, and his mother, and I've heard this story a number of times at different venues and high schools throughout North Jersey, and his mother tells it, she noticed something off, and a family member noticed something off. He appeared to be high, and they confronted him, and he admitted to a little pill problem. But the reality was that pill problem had developed long ago in high school and had transformed into a heroin problem, and he was snorting heroin. And so there was a treatment plan that the family came up with, and there were people from the school in Richmond that got involved, and roommates got involved to test him and to make sure that he was on the right path. And in the second semester, he had his best season ever. He graduated. But the reality is that he hid his addiction and he hid his use of heroin incredibly well. And after graduating, he came home, and it became apparent to his family that the addiction was not going away, but just taking control over his life. And he was put into 28-day treatment programs. He was put into sober homes, and he was kicked out of sober homes. And then ultimately, down the road, it seemed like things got okay, that he was on the right track. He had a job and found some degree of stability in his life. And then I believe, if I remember correctly, the date was January 3rd of 2014, a Friday. And I know this because we prosecuted, when I was Bergen County prosecutor, aspects of this case. On January 3rd, he came home from work and asked to borrow the family car to go to the mall to buy something. And because he was on the right path, his mother agreed to give him the car. And they also had a GPS tracker on it so they could know where he was going. And he, based on the tracker, went to the Garden State Plaza Mall. But rather than buy something, the gift that he was going there to get, he met his drug dealer there and got heroin, came home. And when he came home, his parents, his family noticed that he was high. And so, as is the case in many households that suffer from this crisis, because it's not just the individual, the whole family suffers, there was arguments and there was an interaction, and Brendan went up to his room, and then later that night at around 1 o'clock, so January 4th, early Saturday morning, his father was going to his bed to go to sleep, but stopped by to see Brendan. And he had overdosed. And luckily, his father had happened upon him, and his lips were turning blue, and they called the ambulance. The first responders arrived, and as we heard, as they do day in and day out, 16,000 times last year across the state, that early Saturday morning, they revived him with naloxone. And they took him to Valley Hospital in Ridgewood, New Jersey. And then about 12 hours later, as is the case with this epidemic, once he's medically cleared, there's no plan, there's no ability to hold somebody or to get them into the type of treatment they need. Once they're medically cleared, he was released about 12 hours later at around 1 o'clock. He had gotten a second chance on life. He was given a second chance, brought back from the brink of death with naloxone. He went up to his room, and then about 2 hours later, one of his brothers went up to check on him. And he had overdosed again, this time fatally. He was, I believe, 24 years old at the time. Again, incredible student athlete, scholar athlete in high school, prescribed pains for sports injuries when he was younger and other types of injuries. He had that addiction card in his pocket, and those pills led to a heroin problem that led to his death, despite his parents' best efforts, despite all sorts of efforts to intercede to get him the help that he needed. The reality is, once you get down that path to addiction, it's incredibly difficult to get back to sobriety. This is a powerful, powerful drug, and Brendan is one of 400,000 people that we've lost in the last 2 decades to this epidemic. And as you heard earlier from Chris and Dean Hobbs, Director Hobbs, New Jersey's not immune from this crisis. In the last 5 years alone, if we look at it, we lost 10,000 people in this state to drug overdoses, the majority of which were heroin and opioid related. And according to recent reporting that I read, nearly 2 million people in this country right now in this moment suffer from opioid addiction. That's the magnitude of the crisis, and it doesn't discriminate between the high school star athlete and the blue-collar construction worker who's prescribed opioids for his work injury. It doesn't discriminate between rich and poor. It doesn't discriminate between North Jersey, South Jersey, East, West. If you look at the data on our website, it touches every pocket of this state equally, every corner of every county. And I'm certain there are many of you sitting in this audience. It's not going to happen to me. I don't have that addiction card. I wouldn't be so confident. I would not be so confident because it claims professionals, it claims doctors, it claims lawyers, it claims police officers, it claims athletes. Because it is that powerful if you have that addiction card in your pocket. So the question naturally becomes, what are we doing about it in this state? We have an all-hands-on-deck approach in New Jersey. We're focusing on 3 things: prevention, treatment, and enforcement. And let me just start with enforcement because I want to finish with treatment and prevention. What are we doing when it comes to enforcement? Well, we're holding anyone accountable who's profiting from this epidemic or contributing to it. I don't care if you operate out of an exam room and are pushing pills to your patients and monetizing your prescription pad, and I don't care if you operate out of a corporate boardroom, and I don't care if you operate on a street corner. If you are contributing to this crisis, we are going to hold you accountable in this state, and we have been doing just that. We are taking down the heroin mills who are now sustaining addictions that started with pills. We are taking down doctors who have monetized their prescription pads and are selling scripts instead of treating patients. And then we are going after the manufacturers who started this crisis in the first place. The Purdue Pharmas of the world, the Sackler family. I was asked a question by a reporter just a moment ago, what about this settlement that a lot of state attorneys general are talking about with the Sacklers? I said, there is no settlement. We are not going to settle this unless there is a monetary figure that holds that family personally accountable, with a family that earned billions and billions and billions of dollars on people's misery. Unless there's a settlement that funds treatment for the 2 million people in this country who are suffering right now. And unless there's a settlement that disgorges their ill-gotten gains and sends a message to every other corporate executive out there that we're coming after you if you contributed to this crisis. And now here's the other thing. It's not just the Sacklers. We have other lawsuits in the queue. And so we will continue to hold those large corporate actors accountable for their role in this crisis. And that's a key part of our enforcement efforts. When it comes to treatment, the question is, well, what does law enforcement have to do with treatment? Well, we're bringing a new model to this crisis in New Jersey. In all 21 of our counties, we've now established a diversion program called Operation Helping Hand, or some aspect of it, where we're taking that low-level offender at the moment of arrest and offering them a treatment option. And let me tell you another thing, those low-level offenders look a lot like you guys in this audience. They are athletes. They are people who are right out of high school who went down this road. But rather than put them into this constant cycle of arrest and court appearance, we're diverting them to treatment to try to give them an opportunity in that moment of need. And that's taken hold in this state, and it's a model that other states are now looking to follow. So that's the type of treatment, in addition to giving all of our cops in this state access to naloxone and helping fund their ability to buy naloxone and keep it, because that's how critical of a tool it is right now in this state. On prevention, that's where all of you come in. You know, there was some mention about the video that we filmed with the NJSIAA. It's called Athletes versus Opioids. It's directed at high school athletes, but I would commend you to go on our website or the NJSIAA website to look at that video, because that's prevention. It's not just speaking at 9th grade classes and 8th grade classes or at venues like this. It's speaking wherever we can about just common sense approaches for those involved in athletics. That if you are injured, which I don't know of a student athlete who gets through their life without a sports injury, but when you are injured, be informed. That's the first thing each of you can do. Be informed and ask your doctors about alternatives to opioids. Is there something less powerful than this opioid that you're giving me? What are the consequences here? Now, we've mandated them to do this here in New Jersey, but you should have an informed conversation and give them your informed consent. The second thing each of you can do is don't rush your recoveries. I understand that there's incredible pressure to get back on the field, but don't rush it. When your body heals and is ready to get back, then go back. And if you do get painkillers, just get the amount that you need, not more than you need. Because a lot of the drug-seeking behavior that we've seen, people start in the medicine cabinet if they have access. And so let's limit that access. Let's not have these dangerous drugs around for longer than we need them. Dispose of them at your police stations or our Project Medicine drop boxes that we have, or return them to your pharmacies. And as teammates, be supportive. Be supportive to each other, because there is a mental letdown when you're not on the field. There's a mental letdown when you're sitting on the sidelines. Acknowledge it, but support your teammates and help them in that process. And the last thing, I am certain that in the story of Brendan Cole and so many other student athletes who have lost their lives to this epidemic, I am absolutely certain that there were red flags. And Director Hobbs talked about that. You can't underreact here. You cannot underreact here, because somebody's life is literally on the line. If you see red flags, if you know of someone who is engaging in this type of behavior, have a conversation with them, have a conversation with the coach, have a conversation with somebody in authority on this campus to see how you can get that individual help. Because literally, their life depends on it. And with you all being part of this solution, I am confident that 3,000 number that we saw in this state last year of drug overdoses, fatal drug overdoses, and over 16,000 naloxone administrations, we will start to turn that tide. But it's going to be an all hands on deck approach of those in law enforcement, of those in academics, of those in public health. We all have to come together to find this solution. So I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank you for being here. Hopefully you weren't mandated to be here, but if you were, hopefully you get some credit out of it. But hopefully you took away something from what I shared with you, and hopefully you'll take away something from our panel this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for those remarkable words and your continued efforts to address this crisis. We have come to the panel discussion portion of our program, and right now I'd like to turn the program over to Angelo Valente, who is the Executive Director for a partnership for a drug-free New Jersey. He's going to be facilitating our discussion amongst our panelists. Angelo?
Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you, Chris, for that introduction. I want to begin by thanking the General. His leadership is inspirational. He has really been a champion for New Jersey, and we are very fortunate to have him at the lead of this during this crisis time in the state. So thank you, General. I also want to thank our co-sponsors, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey and Ruckus Athletics, for hosting this tremendous event today. Today's town hall is unique from the previous 24 that we've already had. Because of the collaboration with Rutgers University and Rutgers Athletics, this morning's event will focus on the impact of the opiate epidemic on young athletes. Athletes are presented, as we've heard, with unique challenges when it comes to this crisis. Due to the rigorous demands of the sports they play, young athletes, including those representing Rutgers, can be more likely to be prescribed an opiate to treat pain after an injury or surgery. For example, a recent study found that male young athletes are twice as likely to be prescribed painkillers and 4 times more likely to misuse prescription drugs than male college-age students that do not participate in competitive sports. Another study found that youth participants in high-injury sports had a 50% higher odds of non-medical use of opiates than youths who do not participate in these types of sports. This issue is not unique to athletes that are young or at the collegiate ranks. A study last year found that more than a quarter of former NFL players who had access to prescribed pain medicines during their play career had recently used prescribed opiates, and nearly half of those retired athletes have been taking opiates and reporting misusing them over the past year. It is so important that the public and student athletes here today are aware of the dangers of prescribed opioids and are educated on proper safeguard to prevent the misuse, abuse, and addiction. I'd like to, at this point, introduce our panelists, who will provide a very personal insight into this issue. Our first panelist is a 4-time letter winner at quarterback for the Scarlet Knights from 1992 to 1995. He finished his Rutgers career ranked 4th all-time in touchdowns, 5th in completions, and 6th in passing yards. He's the only player in Rutgers football history to throw more than 40 touchdown passes and rush for 15 touchdowns. An undrafted free agent signee of the New England Patriots, he went on to play 7 seasons in the NFL from 1996 to 2002. Let's all welcome our dear friend, Ray Lucas. Thank you, Ray. Our next panelist is a Queens native who is entering his 6th season with the Rutgers men's basketball program. A veteran mentor, an accomplished recruiter with more than 25 years of coaching experience at the collegiate and high school levels, he previously served 4 seasons as head coach at Fairleigh Dickinson University. Let's welcome our next panelist, the Director of Men's Players Development, Greg Vitrone. And our final panelist served as the state's acting attorney general from June 2013 through March 2016. Among his achievements as acting attorney general, he spearheaded several initiatives to address the heroin and opiate epidemic in our state, including the enhancement of the prescription monitoring program. He now serves as vice president and general counsel for Rutgers University. Please welcome John Hoffman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being part of our panel today. Ray, let's start with you. Can you discuss your battle with the opiate addiction?
Well, my battle started after my NFL career was over with. I came home, I had a serious back injury, that's how I retired. my neck started bothering me, and I didn't have any insurance. In the NFL, you get insurance for 5 years, and then you're on your own. So the doctors couldn't give me an IOU neck surgery that cost $400,000. So what they started prescribing me was pills. I do not point the finger at the NFL because of my injuries. That's why I became an addict. I wear my addict badge, a badge of honor, because I'm a survivor. And to me, that's the most important thing. But I went from 125 pills a month to 1,400 pills a month. I'll say that one more time for everybody that's sitting up there. 125 pills a month to 1,400 pills a month. I could have killed everybody in the front row with how many pills I was taking monthly. Everything that got me to the top of the mountain in the NFL became my crutch in my opioid addiction, because being from Jersey, being a Jersey boy, kind of made different a little bit, so to speak. If there was an obstacle, I didn't go around it. I didn't go over it. I went straight through it. You don't make it to the top of the mountain in the NFL by going around stuff or over stuff. I was suffering in silence, and I thought I was by myself. And I realized for 3 years that I was an addict, I realized that I wasn't suffering in silence, and that there were other people out there like me. And so I started reaching out, and I started to ask questions. When you're an addict, I describe it, and people ask me, how was it? I describe it as this: if you're in a big dark hole and there's people reaching down and you can see their hand, but you just can't quite grab it to get out of the hole. That's what addiction is. You become, self-centered. You always point the finger, you never point the thumb. And I wasn't raised that way. I was always raised to point the thumb. What can I do to make my team better? What can I do extra? And that was important to me, but during the addiction, it was a nightmare. But again, you think of addiction and you think of the guy on the street sitting there. No. Addiction affects us all. An NFL quarterback, a college graduate from Rutgers University. I'm a Jersey boy. I'm proud to be a Jersey boy. I'm proud I stayed home. I'm proud I tried to make my state great. But I'm also an addict, and I will be for the rest of my life.
Thank you. Greg, your daughter has struggled with the opiate addiction. Can you tell us her story and how it's impacted your life?
Sure. I'll start from where we are today. Today, my daughter on Tuesday celebrated her 27th birthday. I have a grandson, my first grandson, Carter, 7-month-old. They are mandated by the state of New York to a facility for drug addiction. I don't think my daughter thought at 15, when she played her first beer pong game, smoked her first blunt, thought 3 years later she'd be taking Oxycontin, or Roxy's, as they called them in her neighborhood. 2 years after that, started shooting heroin. And I say that because that's how quick it happens. No matter what you guys think, I'm at this party, it happens that quickly. She's been, fortunately, I've had great support in a gentleman by the name of Chris Herron, who's helped me learn that this is a disease, okay? And yes, it's a self-inflicting disease, but it's a disease and all the same. I will never stop fighting for her, but the one thing I tell everybody in here, parents, kids, you can't enable. You have to fight, but you cannot enable them. I have my daughter Vanessa, who's a great person. I have my daughter Vanessa, who's the user, who could be the best actress in the world, because when she's using, she'll make you believe the sky is green, purple, whatever she wants it to be that day. So our fight continues. She'll probably be in this facility for at least a year with my grandson. But I just want you to grasp your head around this. For the parents that are here, that have children, for your parents, think about that first child, 2 months old. That's how powerful this disease is. She wasn't thinking about Carter. She was thinking about the disease she had and was continuing to use. Fortunately, she got in trouble, and the police came. My daughter has had 2 overdoses, and Narcan has saved her life both times. So thank you for that. Without Narcan, my daughter probably wouldn't be here today. So I just wanted to be here today to share my story, tell people, the last thing I leave every student athlete in here with is this: if you have a problem, get help. Don't be afraid. We want to help you. If you know somebody that's using, please don't think about street credibility, I'm going to be a rat. Because if that person feels that way, all you have to say to them is, I'd rather tell somebody than go to your funeral. Thank you.
Thank you so much. John, you also unfortunately had a family member who experienced the difficulties of addiction. Could you just share your own personal story?
Sure. You know, my story is a little bit different because I lived sort of a double life in this area, having served as the Attorney General for 3 years. And before I go further, I do want to say it's important to note how incredibly fortunate we are to have an Attorney General that is as dedicated and as active and as concerned and as sensitive to this issue as we have. I know what it's like to sit in that chair. I did it for 3 years. The priorities are conflicted. You're constantly running around, and thank God, Gurbir, you're here and you're dealing with this issue, and I think you've done an amazing job, and you deserve a tremendous amount of credit for that. I was fortunate enough in 2013 to be asked to do that job. And a reporter asked me in the beginning, what do you think are the biggest crises facing the state? And one of the first answers I said was the heroin and opiates addiction. And when we tried desperately to put in place a lot of initiatives to deal with it. We rolled out Narcan to law enforcement. We put forth something called the Drug Monitoring Initiative, which put a lot of optics, a lot of metrics in place that allowed us to get a good sense and a feel for where the addiction problem was around the states. We did, as the general talked about and has expanded brilliantly, diversionary courts for addiction and also for mental health, which is an issue that at some point that I'll return to. We expanded the prescription monitoring program. We expanded what was called the Overdose Prevention Act, which provided prosecutorial immunity to individuals that called in assistance for people that had overdosed. And I'm a former prosecutor. The general's a former prosecutor. We work together as federal prosecutors. It's difficult to immunize people that are sitting around and are contributing to an overdose. And we said, from a human perspective, we have to save lives. And we did a tremendous amount. I was very proud of that. At one point, we had dropped the overdose rate in New Jersey, and I felt that as a public servant, that we in our office had accomplished a lot. And for me, all of that changed in a split second. I'll still remember. It was 4:58 in the morning. It was May 15th. It was 2016. And the phone rings. And it was my mother-in-law. I handed the phone to my wife, and I said, be careful and brace yourself, because I don't think this is going to be good. And it was what I had expected and what I had dreaded. Because as we were living a life, as I was living a life as the Attorney General fighting this, I was also living a personal life in which we were fighting the addiction of my sister-in-law. And at that point, I could tell by the call that my mother-in-law was telling my wife that her sister had died. And it was brutal. It was the hardest thing that we had ever had to deal with. Because if in a split second, what I had been so proud of accomplishing as a public servant, I was so disgusted by. And all I could think about, not what we had done, but what we had failed to do. How much more there was to be done. How much more there was to be accomplished. And the thing I remember most about that was her funeral. And during her wake, 2 teachers of my sister-in-law's came by, and they were separated by about an hour. And they both said the same thing to me. They said, your wife was the best student we ever had, and my wife's got it going. She was the valedictorian of her medical school class. She is a surgeon. She does incredibly well. And they said, but her sister was the smart one. Think about that. There were 2 siblings. My wife, who went to medical school, is an incredible surgeon, and she had 1 sister, and she was a heroin addict. How are they so different? How are their lives so different? What happened? And so, it gave me a very different perspective on how non-discriminatory this problem is. We can sit around, I did it when I was in my 20s, and younger, I thought I was invincible. This can't affect me. This affects everybody. It discriminates against nobody. And here I was fighting this on a public front every day, feeling successful, and then feeling like such a failure, because on a personal level, there was nothing I could do to control what was the biggest tragedy that I had ever played a role in. And that's my personal experience.
Thank you, John. Each of us today have shared our personal stories. And why is that important in breaking down the stigma that in so many ways has been attached to this issue?
For me, it's very simple because, when I went to rehab, I was in there with heart surgeons, dentists, and this disease doesn't discriminate on any level. I think opioids took this country by storm. And again, knowledge to me is power. So I received the gift of getting my neck surgery. I received the gift of sobriety. And if you don't give it back, it's a sin. Like, you have to give it back. You have to come and tell your story. Because if I reach one of you guys that are sitting there right now that might be taking pills and know that I survived it, so can you. You know what I mean? So any chance I get to talk about this stuff and to relate to these young men and women and parents and coaches and teachers is that it can happen to you at any time. And it doesn't matter what nationality you are, where you went to school, where you graduated college from, how old you are. There was a 55-year-old man in rehab with me. 55. Man, that's a long time to start a heroin addiction at 55. But it doesn't discriminate, and it started with opioids. So for me to come here and tell my story, if I could reach one of these kids up there, then so be it.
That's right. I think for me, I'm a parent, so I don't have the addiction. But the most important thing for me as a parent is to say, how can I give back to young people what I've lived, and to parents to say to them, listen, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that this happened. I think I've lived with guilt for the last 7 years, and it wasn't because of anything other than you want the best for your children. And I had to go through my own therapy, and we have to realize that this is a disease. It's a disease. It's self-inflicted, but it's a disease. We have to embrace it. We have to keep fighting. And for me as a parent, now I'm in the fighting stage. I'm beyond the guilt. I'm beyond. The only person that could help Vanessa is Vanessa. I could be there. I could walk with her. I could hold her hand. But I finally have realized the only person that could help my daughter is my daughter. Mm-hmm. So the parents that are here, that's all you can do. Don't ever stop fighting, but understand you could want it, but if they don't want it, you can give them all the luxuries in the world. If they don't want it, it's not going to happen. So for me, that's why I'm here today, to just try and say, keep fighting, keep believing, and it's a disease.
So I think Ray and Greg make great points. And Ray, I think that sort of the courage that you show in standing up and saying, look, I am an addict. I have dealt with this issue is incredibly important, and it's going to, and the leadership that shows, it's going to astigmatize this as it needs to. I remember when I was young growing up, people didn't really talk about cancer. They didn't want to talk about cancer. You wouldn't mention cancer. And slowly but surely, it became destigmatized so that people could talk about it and get the support that they needed. And I think something like that has to go on now. And I think the leadership that you've shown is helping that out. At the same point, it is that realization that it is a disease, and what that Greg talked about, which is incredibly important. I developed this information from dealing with my sister-in-law, and I used to actually say, you feel like you want to scream at an addict because you want them to change, but it's like screaming at cancer. And what effect would that have? How successful would that be? And you have to understand it as a disease and the impact that it has upon you as a disease. And unless you do and understand that it really cannot be successfully battled and can't be successfully beaten unless you understand the implications of it as a disease.
Thank you, John. Ray, there's so many student athletes that are here today. What particularly would have changed your direction if you knew something about this disease as an athlete, especially at the college level?
Well, to just put it in perspective, I've had 4 neck surgeries since my opioid. I had 3 neck surgeries since my opioid. I had 13 knee surgeries since my addiction. And every time I had surgery, I didn't take one friggin' pill. There are so many options out there for student athletes that nobody knows about. Nerve blocks. I had microfracture knee surgery where they drill holes through your kneecap. Okay? And I'm not a hospital guy, so I go home. Like, they were like, you have to stay for 4 days. I was like, yeah, kiss my ass. I'm going home. Okay? To my wife's dismay, of course, because she's got to be the one taking care of me. But I got a nerve block. Okay? So for 48 hours, I couldn't feel my leg. And then after the 48 hours, I dealt with the pain. You're a lot stronger than you think you are, okay? And there's a lot of different things, and the Attorney General said it best, ask the friggin' questions. Ask the questions. You know what I mean? I just had my 4th neck surgery 6 weeks ago, okay? I'm in constant muscle spasms. I'm of the 4% that had the surgery that I had. They put a 2-inch steel plate and took my 4-inch steel plate out. And I'm in constant muscle spasms. I'm in pain every single day. Some days worse than other days. But I don't reach because I'm strong enough up here and inside my heart to know that I can make it through. And so can you. So ask the friggin' questions. Do I have to take these painkillers? And if you do, then you need 2 weeks. I mean, after 2 days, yeah, this thing hurts. It hurt when I had microfracture knee surgery, but I didn't reach. And if I could do it, you damn sure can do it because you guys are a lot younger and a lot stronger than I am right now anyway.
And just to pick up on that point, in New Jersey, we were the first state in the nation, and the general spoke about it, to pass a law that required physicians and dentists to have conversations with the patients about the addictive quality of the drug. So that conversation is now required in New Jersey.
Well, the other part was when I was an addict, I had 10 doctors. Because, my body was falling apart. You play 8 years in the NFL, your body has a tendency to fall apart. So, you can go and shop, and I'm not going to lie to you guys. I use my celebrity sometimes. Like, one of the guys that was giving me pills would say, Luke, man, can you get to the Marquee, a club in the city? I'm like, it'll cost you 1,000 pills. I called them up and said, hey, I represent Ray Lucas. I'm on bottle service, table service. The deal was I would go, walk them in through the ropes. They'd give me my pills. I'd have a drink, and I'd leave. So you will find a way, and what he said is true. It was a choice to get sober for me. And it was more or less my wife saying either you go or me and my 3 kids go. And I wasn't willing to risk my family. So you are 100% right. I made the choice to get sober. But at the same time, you know what I mean? Ask the questions, man. Just ask the friggin' questions.
Thank you. What we're going to do at this point is open up to any questions that the audience might have. I know there's some mics that are going to be coming around. So if you have a question, maybe you could just raise your hand and we'll make sure that the mics get to you. As we're doing that, Greg, maybe you could just give us a little bit more advice from a family perspective and also from a coach and teammate perspective. I mean, what should someone do in a situation when they think that someone might be abusing prescribed opioids?
Well, I think for myself, and I think for a lot of coaches, I think we become in denial, especially when it's your child. There was warning signs that I looked past, especially, I have a son, I think, especially in Italian nationality, me being a Sicilian, you're tougher on the males. And I looked past some of the things, the warning signs of my daughter. And I will tell every parent, the first time you see them, marijuana, drinking, stop it, catch it. Don't think because they're in your basement or your backyard, it's okay. No, it's not okay. It's not okay. It's not okay for them to have parties at your house at 17 and you take their keys. No, because it's just going to lead to the next thing, to the next thing. So for me as a parent, my advice to parents all the time is the sooner you come to the realization that you see warning signs, address them. Go to the professionals. I'm a parent, I'm not a drug counselor, but I do know there's a lot of drug counselors out there that'll be willing to see you no matter what time of hour of the night it is. So,
And we know
that's
that
my
Rutgers has a lot of services available, student services that are there to help. So
The one thing I do want to touch on, would like to say is, and this is one thing that I spoke with John, and Ray could probably attest to this, 28 days is not long enough. Parents, you think you're putting them in there for 28 days? That's not even just scratching the surface. My daughter needs a year, 2 years, because the length of time that you do these drugs, it takes double the amount of time, am I correct, Ray, to even realize
But 88% of everybody that goes to rehab falls on their face. 88%. And they told me that while I was in rehab. I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, if you ain't gonna help me, what am I doing here? But for me, it's not about the fall on your face. It's about the getting up. Because when you're an addict for life. Like I always tell everybody, my opioid addiction is doing push-ups and sit-ups the whole time while I'm trying to stay straight. And it's getting bigger and it's getting stronger. And sometimes you fall off the horse. But you just got to get yourself back up and get back on. I went to rehab for 42 days. 42. And they wanted me to stay a whole bunch, a lot longer, but me being me, I was like, I've had enough of this shit. I'm sorry. I'm out of here. But again, it is warranted, but if you fall down, and you might fall, get back up. And there's no written rule about sobriety. Whatever works for you, works for you. And that's good enough as long as you stay sober.
I just want to put this in perspective, okay? My daughter has been in 12 rehabs in 7 years. 12 rehabs in 7 years. So it's continual. And when I bring her in there, it's not crying, it's the fight. It's the fight, it's the next fight. Part of this addiction is they're gonna relapse. Mm-hmm. Embrace the relapse, because it's gonna happen. It's almost impossible for any addict to go in one time and walk away. It's almost impossible. And Ray gave you the stat, 88%. So as a parent or as a best friend, please be there, supportive. If it's 20 times, 30 times, just keep fighting. Because one day, if that person wants it, the light bulb will go on and they'll beat it.
John, I mentioned the prescription monitoring program earlier on. Maybe you could just share some of the other programs that the state has instituted, in particular how the prescription monitoring program works to help protect people in the state.
So one of the things we did was, in realizing how much overprescription was going on, we realized that we had to get some sense of what the depth of that problem was, and we instituted a program that requires physicians and pharmacists to both register prescriptions and then to monitor prescriptions as they're used, so that a physician can find out, hey, this fellow that's coming to me, what was the last time he got a prescription? Is he just coming to me because yesterday he got 500 pills somewhere? And then we realized that that doesn't help, because this problem doesn't recognize borders. And so we established interconnectivity with New York and with Delaware, and then begun the process with Pennsylvania, so that we could try to get knowledge and information, which is power in this area, and try and get that and to use that. And that's just one of about the half dozen programs that we did. But I'll tell you, we instituted, and General Graywall has, as I said, brilliantly picked up on and done many of his own initiatives. But we have been able to manage this problem. There is an incredible effort that's going to have to be made to beat this problem. And it's got to come from so many different perspectives.
Jersey does make it hard to be an addict. Like, I couldn't be an addict now, like when I was back then 10 years ago. But because of that, what you implemented, because I was going to 10 different people, and with all the injuries I had, it was easy to get a script. But they didn't know where. Like, my pharmacy, one time I walked in and they were like, "You were here 4 days ago. What is this?" And I was like, "Oh shit, I forgot. I got to go to a different pharmacy." So I went to a different pharmacy. They filled it. Yeah. So, but Jersey's doing a great job of making sure that our kids and relatives and everybody's getting taken care of.
Sure. If I could add one other thing, I talked before about these diversionary courts. There's an issue that I think needs to be discussed whenever you discuss addiction, and that's the mental health component to that. And if it's not the mental health impact that addiction has had, it's the mental health driver that leads to a lot of addiction, and that certainly impacts and can be as impactful upon athletes as it is upon blue-collar workers. And until you can't really untangle those two, and it's important to realize that if you have a friend or a relative who is facing a mental health issue as well, it is very common to self-medicate. My sister-in-law had a bipolar issue. My sister-in-law used to say to me, "You don't understand, I take drugs to feel normal, not to feel abnormal." And so at the same time as destigmatizing addiction, you have to destigmatize mental health issues and then think about them together, because one, they're often a driver into addiction, and two, they're often an after effect of addiction.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to the audience now. We have a question, I believe, from someone in the audience. Anybody have a question so far? Yeah, we don't have a question.
Okay. Hi. Hello. Hi. I guess this is for the Attorney General, former. My name is Jenna. I'm a person in long-term recovery from alcohol and drug addiction, now almost 5 years. And the opiate epidemic has personally, affected me. My boyfriend died of an opioid overdose in 2011, so that's 8 years ago now. So I've been dealing with this for a long time, and I want to know now the street drugs, the opioids have fentanyl in them. Like, do you guys know how you're testing that or how you're figuring out how to crack down on that? Because a lot of times these drugs that are manufactured on the street or wherever, they're now being cut with fentanyl, and I know that's killing people at a faster rate, and I just was curious if you knew anything about that.
So first off, Jenna, and as I said to Ray before, so your courage in being open about your issue and your boyfriend's issue is helpful exponentially to everybody here, and thank you for that. I know it's hard. You can see how difficult it was for me and what an impact it's had on me, and I did not have as personal an impact as you did, so God bless you, and thank you so much. My sister-in-law died from a combination of fentanyl, heroin overdose, and fentanyl is brutal. There's a statistic that was shared from me earlier that a 3,000 fentanyl that costs $3,000 to make can be sold on the streets for $1 million. So you think about that and what an incredible profit driver that is. And so certainly the testing is more sophisticated. The understanding of fentanyl as a cut additive to heroin is more sophisticated. But whether it's being controlled, no, we wouldn't be here if it was. And I'd be lying to you. And if I said that, yeah, we have this thing really under control. We don't. Fentanyl is more dangerous than heroin. Fentanyl is originally a legitimate drug. It's a very powerful painkiller that was used to prescribe to end-of-life cancer, people suffering from cancer at the end of their lives. And now anything that provides that type of profit motive to dealers is you can understand from a drug dealer's perspective. And you have to understand there is a distinction between a drug dealer and a drug user and an addict. I remember prosecuting a case when I was a federal prosecutor, and I pulled the guy in who was a cooperator, an incredibly successful drug dealer. Incredibly. 2 months on a wiretap on a phone, he had 3,300 calls. And one of the calls dealt with marijuana, just one. And we were sitting around, and I asked him, I said, you got this one call that deals with marijuana. I'm just curious, why are we all talking about marijuana when you're dealing heroin and crack? I said, we all just going to get high? And he looked at me like I had two heads. And he said, are you crazy? And in language that's more colorful than I will use now, he said, that stuff screws you up. It's bad for business. That's a cold, calculated businessman. And he didn't use drugs, wasn't an addict. And there's a big distinction that you have to make. And when the general spoke before about law enforcement, this isn't just about sympathizing with addicts. This is about taking the aggressive actions you can take about the cold businessman who is profiting with a drug that costs $3,000 to make and $1 million profit.
Do you realize that you don't know what you're getting anymore? Okay, if we're going to talk street, let's talk street. Okay, you have no idea what you're getting and who's making stuff in their basement. You could die from a pinhole, like on top of a pin of fentanyl. You could be dead. That simple, dead. No second chances, no Narcan, no nothing. You could be dead. You don't even know what these guys are making anymore, what they're using. And in the end, that's the key component. How do you know what you're getting? You don't.
That's absolutely correct. Other questions from the audience? Do we have another question? Yes, there's a lady here.
Hi, my name is Sheila. I'm also a person in long-term recovery, which did I break it? Oh no. I've been in recovery from drugs and alcohol since December 12th of 2015. And I love what you said, John, about how you compared how cancer was perceived back in the day, and after there was a narrative about it, and after people started talking about it and treating it as a public health issue, it became destigmatized. And that's so important for addiction, to not only be treated as a public health issue, but also to be destigmatized. And I think a way of doing that is the words we use to describe it, and also just talking about it. We're not these people just congregating in church basements anymore, but we're people all across society in all walks of life. And I no longer identify as just an alcoholic or an addict, but I'm also a person in long-term recovery because I'm not defined by my addiction. So my question would be for Ray and for Greg, can you just describe other ways that you fight stigma and help to break down barriers for people in recovery?
Well, like I said, I'm not ashamed of who I am. You know, I look in the mirror every day, and I'm a quarterback. I like to be pretty. I do like to be pretty, and I am proud of the man that I have become. And I know there's an epidemic in New Jersey, but it's nationwide. Before, like, the stigma was, if you're an addict, you're the guy on the street that's begging for change. This opioid thing changed everything. So for me to be a survivor, to give somebody hope that there is a way out, that in the end you can make it. So I don't have, it was funny when Sarah came and talked to me, she said, "Are you open about it?" Hell yeah, I'm open about it. I want you guys to know that there's a way back, and that nothing is impossible. Because at one point, I was ready to drive my truck off the GW Bridge. You know what I mean? And that's how bad in addiction I was. Like, I just wanted it to be over. And my daughter came in to my room, and they were going to church, and I was going to the GW as soon as they left. And she said, "Daddy, you know what? I love you." And I said, "You know what? I got to live for her." You know what I mean? For my wife and stuff. So there's always a way out, always. If you fall, pick your ass back up and try it again.
And first, I commend you. Unbelievable. And I think for myself, drugs in a family has always been what? Hidden, right? We always wanted to hide it. Father's an alcoholic. We grew up in my neighborhood in Queens, everybody's father drank. Grew up in an Irish Catholic neighborhood. It was hidden, okay? The first day that I opened up to the first person and now have my coaches, my RU family, the support I receive, the support my daughter receives, unbelievable, from me talking to one person one day and getting over the fear that my daughter's an addict and has a disease. So for me, I tell people all the time, embrace it because it's a disease, like John said, just like cancer, just like being a diabetic. Embrace it, and you will be amazed at the response that you get and the feeling you get. And sometimes people, when you talk to people, they don't have to give you answers, just for them to listen to your story is unbelievable. So for me, it was the first day that I told somebody that my daughter was an addict and had a disease.
Give back. That's all I can say. I'm a firm believer in if I received my gift, that if I don't give back, it's a sin. Like, you got to give it back. You have to tell your story because you never know who's listening. And you could reach one person, and that would be giving back. That would be enough.
Excellent. Can I just add, I think it's interesting that the comment that you made about language and titles. You know, I mean, at one point, sort of, Ray, you could say you're an addict. At another point, you could say, I'm a fighter. I'm a survivor. You know, I'm somebody who overcame what many people can't overcome. And that's something to be unbelievably proud of. It makes you a role model. It makes you, Jenna, a role model to everybody. And I think that change in language is that's a very astute observation, I think.
Yes, thank you. We only have a few more minutes, so what we wanted to do is, first of all, we want to thank our panel for doing an outstanding job. And this is not easy to come up here and to do what they've done, and so we really appreciate their willingness to share. We want to thank all of you for being here today, and we ask you to please take this message to your classmates, to your teammates that are not here, because this is a message that everybody has to hear. So we hope that you'll be able to be really an important tool to help those that are in need. We want to thank Horizon, certainly for having this town hall series and for bringing us here today at Rutgers, and for Rutgers for being such great host for this important event and this important conversation and discussion. I just want to wrap up by asking each of our panelists to just leave each of you with probably the number one bit of advice they would like you to take home with you, and in particular, you know, from how this opiate epidemic impacts athletes. So maybe we'll start with you, Ray.
Being an athlete in any sport, I don't care what it is, golf, it doesn't make a difference. You're going to get hurt, you're going to get sore, you're going to have, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? The guy with the golf shirt's over there laughing at me because I said golf. You swing a club, you can get injured. Trust me. I got injured on the golf course. I won't tell anybody the story, but I'm just saying, be smart. When you get the pills, ask the friggin' question. Be smart. Because, again, you know your body. You have a guy who's telling you what's wrong with your body, but you know your body. You know how much pain you're in. You know where you're at physically. Be honest with the doctor. Ask the friggin' questions. Because no matter what we do, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be in pain. We're going, you know, I'm no spring chicken no more. I mean, it takes me 30 minutes to get out of bed every day. You know what I mean? But I don't reach for anything. So be careful when you reach, because all roads can lead to addiction. I don't care what drug you're using, alcohol, pills, whatever it may be. Just be careful, man, and ask the question.
And my advice is twofold. First, to the young people, don't think that just by going to that party, drinking that cake and that beer pong, that it could stop there. And to the parents, don't be in denial, and at the first sign that you see that warning sign, reach out and get help. I hear a lot of parents tell me, and they say, oh, it's only marijuana. Okay, that's what I said. 2 years later, it was Roxy's. 1 year later, it was heroin. So don't when you see those warning signs, get the help.
So I always want to pick up on what Ray said on being an athlete, to be a teammate, too. If you see something, be courageous, talk to somebody about it, confront somebody, bring it to the attention of others. You do it out on the field or on the court. You pick other people up. You make sure they're accountable. You make sure you're accountable to them. This is no different. And when Ray talks about being an athlete, make sure you're a teammate. Because I tell you, and I swear to God, if you are not, you will spend a lot of the time in your life looking back at this time and wishing you had that time back. And that's not the way to go through life. So be an athlete, be a teammate.
Thank you all. Once again, we want to thank our panel. Outstanding job. And We want to conclude today's program by thanking all of you for spending some time with us today, for getting firsthand knowledge about how opiates lead to dependency and then that leads to addiction. And we want to ask you once again to please take this message and share this important message with your classmates and your teammates. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, guys, for incredible insight, Ray, Greg, John, and Angelo. We'd like to welcome back up one last time the Director of Athletics here at Rutgers, Pat Hobbs.
Thank you. I said to you at the beginning of this that today would probably be one of the most important conversations and discussions that you heard, and I think you now see that. Thank you, John, Greg, Ray, for sharing your stories, for providing your advice. I've learned a lot today, and I thought I knew a lot about this subject already. And I know I speak on behalf of our coaches and our student athletes and all the students and others who are here in this audience today to say thank you to each and every one of you. And I would just close by saying, because we know this, statistically speaking, among us is someone who's using with a problem. Today is the day to come forward and ask for help. We're here. Thank you.
We hope that today's discussion has educated you to make better choices, to ask more questions, to know where to turn for help and what signs to look for if someone you know may be struggling with addiction. This weekend represents a great opportunity to make a difference on campus or in your community. This weekend, the Partnership for a Drug-Free New Jersey will hold the 4th annual Knockout Opioid Abuse Day throughout the state of New Jersey. Last year, more than 10,000 volunteers statewide helped spread the message about the dangers of prescription opioids and educated their fellow community members on the severity of the opioid crisis. It's a great opportunity for you to take action on campus, in your community. Materials are available on the partnership resource table right up here. Now, each of you was given a survey to complete at the conclusion of today's town hall.